Going in. This episode wasn't supposed to happen. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If deep dives aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. There is absolutely no time to waste today. We have a lot of material to get through. I may have bit off more than I can chew, but more on that later. This week's album now. This week's album is Van Morrison, Astral Weeks. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post hints of what next week's album is gonna be. I make announcements, I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written version of the review on my website, linked in the description. All right, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is a repress. Looking at the labels, this appears to be a later repress. From what year exactly, I'm not sure. It was sent into my P.O. box. Thank you, kind viewer. I never would have found this on my own, and trust me, I looked for years. Astral Weeks seems to be a tricky one to find. Now let's talk about this cover art, because when you look into it, it becomes kind of an interesting situation. The Astral Weeks art was photographed by Joel Brodsky. Why does this get weird? Because he was Elektra's in-house guy, and this is a Warner record. Joel's most known for all of these covers by didn't mean to throw that. These two covers by The Doors, the Stooges' self-titled record, which I know I have, I just can't find it in my shelves today for some reason. And, of course, kick out the jams, motherfucker! Because I can't escape these guys. And the Astral Weeks cover was designed by Ed Thrasher, who I associate most with Reprise. See this Joni Mitchell cover, this Jimi Hendrix cover. He was mostly responsible for art direction. This circle inside a square frame seems to be the approximation of a fisheye lens cover, sort of like the Byrds, or Jimi Hendrix, or the Hollies, just without a fisheye lens. Though the text up here in pink is quite evocative of Art Nouveau, it seems to be a more modern interpretation of these psychedelic album covers. On Astral Weeks, we of course have Van Morrison on vocals, guitar, and serving as principal lyricist. His group consists of Jay Berliner and Barry Kornfeld on guitar, Richard Davis on double bass, Connie Kay on drums, and Warren Smith Jr. on percussion, including the vibraphone. We also have John Payne on flute and saxophone, and Larry Fallon playing harpsichord, as well as writing the string arrangements. Astral Weeks was produced by Louis Merenstein, engineered by Bruce Arthur. Roll transition. Okay. I'm gonna be real with you guys. This will be far from a comprehensive overview of the historical context of Astral Weeks. Someone wrote an entire book on this shit. If I were to detail all of the circumstances surrounding the making of this album, we'd be here for upwards of 90 minutes. But as observed by Lester Bangs, praise be, Astral Weeks was a product of its time. It came out, quote, when a lot of things that a lot of people cared about passionately were beginning to disintegrate, and the self-destructive undertow that always accompanied the great 60s party had an awful lot of ankles firmly in its maw and was pulling straight down. Indeed, 1968 was a crazy time in American history. I've covered it over and over again on this channel. Two very high-profile political assassinations took place within months of each other, MLK in April and RFK in June. Public support of the Vietnam War was waning. Student protests are cropping up all over the country. More and more young people are getting politically involved. Which makes sense, seeing as the draft affected them the most. The summer of love is gone, the counterculture is getting more radical, and mere weeks before Astral Weeks' recording, the '68 DNC riots went down in Chicago. For all of the above reasons, I mark 1968 1968 as the year the optimism of the 60s died. We had a brief flash of it return with Woodstock the next summer, but the Manson family murders and Altamont evaporated what little bit of the spirit remained. And for those reasons, I think it's safe to call 68 a generational existential crisis. The turbulence on the world stage has forced pop out of psychedelia for the most part and into a back-to-basics thing. But even though psych is dead, its effects remain. It shoved rock into jazz. Astral Weeks has all of these qualities of the generational existential crisis, of the general pastoral feeling, and the jazz sensibility. Van Morrison, no relation to Jim, has been in America for quite some time now, making his name as a musician, first with them, then on his own. So he's got a front row seat to everything going down. Van's been having a bad time as of late. Even though it's a massive hit, Brown Eyed Girl has become the bane of his existence, and his label kind of fucking hates him. Not exactly his label. His label's recently deceased exec Bert Burns' wife, Eileen. We got that? Alright, so Eileen, married to Bert. Bert is exec of Bang Records. Bang Records is Van's label. You are gonna need to remember this because the domino effect Eileen sets off is the reason Astral Weeks exists. She blamed the stress that killed her husband on Van for some reason and just decided to make his life miserable. Van's contract stated he was due to present one album a year to Bang Records. Pretty simple, right? But when Bert died, pretty close to when Van's contract was set to be renewed, she banned him from entering the studio. She made sure he couldn't find work either, effectively having him blacklisted from venues in New York City. Eileen was also trying to deport him. That's how much she hated this guy. It was on site. But the brown-eyed girl herself, Van's girlfriend Janet, married him so he could stay in the States. They ran off to Massachusetts together to escape the mob. Yeah, when Bert died, some sketchy people came into ownership of Bang Records. One of them smashed a guitar over Van's head. It was a whole big thing. Seriously, this was no joke. Janet described scary people banging on their door demanding money. Broke, desperate, and fearing for their lives, the new Mr. and Mrs. Morrison got a shithole apartment in Cambridge. There, in the fog of paranoia, Van wrote Astral Weeks. It's not a strictly biographical work like many have assumed over the decades, though Cypress Avenue and Madame George do take place in Belfast. Van said to NPR, quote, "It's not about me. It's totally fictional. It's put together of composites, of conversations I heard, you know, things I saw in movies, newspapers, books, whatever. That's it. There's no more." The material was instead inspired by people he met in Boston. Janet helped with the creative process however she could, transcribing lyrics that he would go back and revise later, and listening back to demos with him. About the writing, she said, quote, "Van liked to work in a sort of stream of consciousness way back then, letting the tape recorder continue to run while he just sort of played guitar and improvised." Unable to return to New York, Van made a home of the Catacombs Club on Boylston. He started playing under the name The Van Morrison Controversy and formed a loose group. Bassist Tom Kilbania, drummer Joey Bebo, and flautist John Payne. According to John, he had no idea he was playing with the Van Morrison until they just started playing Brown Eyed Girl. While playing at the Catacombs, Van met Warner exec Joe Smith. With Bob Schwade of Inherit Productions, credited on the back cover, Joe would swoop in and save the day, buying out the rest of Van's contract. But when I tell you the circumstances were sketch as hell, Joe had to leave a duffel bag with 20 grand, about $181,200 in today's money, in cash, in an abandoned building. About the drop, he said, quote, "I got the signed contract and got the hell out of there. But of course, Eileen wasn't gonna go down without a fight." Bang's publishing company, because remember this is the 60s, music, production, and distribution are all handled by separate entities, enters the chat. They want 3 original compositions every month for a year, so 36 songs total. What does Van do? He records 36 nonsense songs, all in one session, ranging from lyrical slop to straight up gibberish.
It's a personal,
and handed them all in on a steaming hot platter of fuck you. Not happy that Van outsmarted them, they then demanded 50% ownership of any single released within a calendar year of Astral Weeks sessions. This is where Warner steps in, wriggling Van out of it by just not releasing any singles from the album. Fooled again, the publishing company changes their minds one more time, saying they just want 2 songs. They don't have to be singles, just give us some fucking songs, please, and I promise we'll leave you alone forever, cause really, you're more trouble than it's worth at this point. So Van cuts his losses, forks over dummy recordings of Beside You and Madam George, and he is finally free.
Way out of the back street, out of the window.
The rest of Astral Weeks was recorded at Century Sound in New York across just 3 days in the studio. September 25th, October 1st, and October 5th. Day 1 produced the title track, Beside You, Cypress Avenue, and Madam George. Day 2 just produced The Way Young Lovers Do, and Day 3 was the rest. Warner had trouble finding a producer for Van at first, because everyone just wanted another brown-eyed girl. After a few go-arounds, they finally land on Louis Merenstein. He was really vibing with Van's new approach, and he had a vision. Merenstein assembled a group for Van, including Jay Berliner, who played on Charlie Mingus's The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, Richard Davis, who played for Sarah Vaughan,
Ronald Bright on piano, Richard Davis on bass, Art Morgan on drums,
and Connie Kay of the Modern Jazz Quartet, notably not the band Van rehearsed with. Now, to dispel some of the more famous myths surrounding this album, John Cale said he worked in the studio next to Van and that he was apparently so awful and difficult to work with that the band had to work solo. But pretty much everyone who's actually worked on Astral Weeks has come out in the decades following saying this just isn't true. It is true that Van didn't fraternize with the band much, but he seemed more detached and aloof, shy even, more than angry. Warren Smith remembers, quote, Van was kind of quiet. He sat in the control booth most of the time and listened and then overdubbed his tracks. Back in 1987, Richard Davis said, quote, people say he must have talked to you about the record and created the magic feeling that had to be there. I don't remember any conversations with him. He pretty much kept to himself. He didn't make any suggestions about what to play, how to stylize what we were doing. And Connie agreed. When he asked Van what he wanted for the drums, he said something to the effect of, well, I don't know, play whatever you feel like. This loose direction meant that the players could really impart their signature on the material. Now, according to Van, when Astral Weeks was completed, Warner very nearly didn't release the album. Or maybe they actively suppressed it. Yeah, spoiler alert, Van will have a tempestuous relationship with this label too, though there's 100% less mob involved now. The track listing of Astral Weeks goes as follows. Opening up side 1, or In the Beginning, as it's titled on the back cover, we have the title track, Astral Weeks, followed by Beside You, then Sweet Thing, and side 1 closes with Cypress Avenue. Opening up side 2, or Afterwards, we have The Way Young Lovers Do, followed by Madam George, then Ballerina, and the album closes with Slim Slow Slider. Astral Weeks was released in November of 1968 to practically nothing. Now, to be fair, there was a lot going on in the back half of '68 musically, and most of it was the White Album. It just slaughtered any and all competition sales-wise. Poor Village Green. But in March of 1969, Greil Marcus for Rolling Stone magazine reviewed Astral Weeks. To my knowledge, they were the first major music publication on this side of the pond to review the album. To begin with, outside of Brown Eyed Girl, Greil was not a fan of Blowin' Your Mind. Quote, imagine a half hour of Elvin Bishop's Drunk Again, only much worse, and one has something akin to Blowin' Your Mind. Damn! The utter flop of the previous album made this one all the more remarkable to him. He uses all the usual terms like timeless, strong, serious, and intelligent. I fucking hate music critics. I love music critics, but I fucking hate music critics. A bunch of self-important assholes we are. He praises the timeless ensemble that allows Van to explore vocally. He singles out Young Lovers Do as a low point for its kind of mismatched quality and some awkward lines and moments. But aside from these misgivings, he all but says Astral exists outside his grasp as a writer and listener, and he's left in awe. Quote, "Mystery in the midst of an essay. I turned off the phonograph and stepped outside into the light of the street lamps. Across the way, from another house, another place, came the hum of soft bass behind the voice of Van Morrison, a voice unheard as the bass counted out the strange matrix of Madame George into the still of the night." Lester Bangs claimed Astral stumped him as well. Quote, "I haven't got the slightest idea what that means. You're in trouble anyway when you sit yourself down to explicate just exactly what a mystical document, which is exactly what Astral Weeks is, means. But in that Lester fucking Bangs way, he proves he absolutely knows what Astral Weeks means. Despite Sister Ray, he found commonalities between Astral Weeks and another cult juggernaut of 68, White Light, White Heat. There was a redemptive element in the blackness, ultimate compassion for the suffering of others, and a swath of pure beauty and mystical awe that cut right through the heart of the work. He found most merit in Astral Weeks' feel, created both within and outside its sound. The ensemble, the playing, Van's vocal acrobatics, and the apparent meaninglessness yet hefty weight within the lyrics. He singles out Cypress Avenue and Madame George as the most profound and crushingly human moments. He warns that if one thinks too much about the humanity of these characters, they may die inside. But then again, something about Astral attracts the decaying, and this crush is part of living. It's the beauty of living. For what it's worth, Astral Weeks even stumps Van Morrison himself. He's said on multiple occasions how miraculous the whole thing is. He's gone back and forth on it over the years, saying it was too, quote, samey in the 70s, then being proud of it a few years later, then refusing to play it for like 40 years. So clearly the man himself wasn't gonna do much to promote it. What did the trick? A little album called Moondance. Van enjoyed something I like to call the Ziggy Stardust effect, though both of these albums happened years before Ziggy, it's just the instance that comes to mind. When Moondance blew up, it drummed up mass interest in Van's back catalog, including Astral Weeks. A full-page ad that I can't find anymore because the Internet Archive is down, S-O-F-ing-S, I don't think any of you know how bad that is, said, quote, "If you want Astral Weeks and can't find it, yell at the store's record buyer. Wow! Because you're the customer and you're always right. Undo the veils of potential obscurity." It was a very slow burn, but with enough people yelling, Astral Weeks achieved cult classic status. Bruce Springsteen, Bono, Joan Armatrading, Elvis Costello, all in its ranks of admirers. Scorsese says he modeled the opening of Taxi Driver after Astral. Even Edward Cullen and Edward Scissorhands are fans. It ranked number 19 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time list from 2003, in between London Calling and Thriller. It dropped to number 60 in 2023, but still, that's an astonishingly high rating for a relatively obscure album from over 50 years ago. Since all subsequent lists are derived from the writing of the 2003 list, and I have that one in print, here's what it says. Quote, "This is music of such enigmatic beauty that 35 years later, Jesus Christ, that's 20 years ago, quote, it still defies easy, admiring description. Morrison, a notably private man for whom singing and songwriting have long been a form of emotional armor as well as release, never sounded as warm and ecstatic, more sensual and vulnerable as he did on Astral Weeks. Astral Weeks is Morrison going deep inside himself, to the far corners of his life and art without a net or fear. He was never this open and naked again." It's true. After this, Van retreated to the comfy, cozy, smooth, jazzy Moondance, and then Tupelo, Honey and Others. Though Cypress Avenue is a set staple for Van, Astral wasn't performed live in full until 2009. So, what do I think of Astral Weeks? Going in, this episode wasn't supposed to happen.
And you shall take me strongly in your arms.
Eagle-eyed viewers of last week's episode will notice I spliced in B-roll where I usually tease the jacket of the next album. As you'll see in this raw footage right about here, this episode was supposed to be Fifth Dimension by the Byrds. You know, David Crosby, 8 Miles High, the birth of psych rock and all that junk. Very Vinyl Monday. And there were 2 other albums with this one in the running for this very slot you're watching now. They would have been Joni Mitchell's Song to a Seagull or a redux of Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, but seeing as I covered both Joni and the Crosby, Stills and Nashiverse fairly recently, I axed both those albums, and I was even unsure about Fifth Dimension. As I was exporting that raw footage to my computer, minutes after I held this up with full intent to write an episode about it came to me. It called to me from the spare room where 2.5 boxes of unhoused recent acquisitions lie waiting to be shelved. It said, Astral Weeks. I went in thinking I was covering a quaint singer-songwriter album after a musically complex and challenging 3-week run. I was gifted quite possibly the most impenetrable set of lyrics I've ever had to dissect on this series. It doesn't help that the writer has been historically effusive about what the fuck he's talking about, and not many critics are willing to really crack these songs open. This episode was truly a challenge on all levels: research, writing, analysis, production too, I have no doubt. I usually use a combination of what I call active and passive listening. Active listening is when I sit down with my notes and the lyrics and just listen, nothing else, no distractions. Passive listening is everything else. Listening when I'm getting ready in the morning, taking a walk, cooking, etc., etc. I use both methods equally because different things jump out at you at different times. It was very difficult to conduct passive listening this week because the word Greil Marcus was looking for in his Rolling Stone review was arresting. A lot of it comes from Van's harsh, brassy voice against these sweet arrangements. I admit Van's voice can be a bit much for me outside the context of garage rock, but in the context of Astral Weeks, Van's voice functions like another horn. The vagueness of the music, the meandering around itself, makes his impassioned delivery all the more jarring. It felt wrong to be dressed for 1968 for this, that's why I kind of pushed it into the 70s. Aside from some choice moments, Astral is so un-1968. Intentional or not, it was constructed to be timeless. It's like what Joe Boyd and John Wood respectively tried to do for Nick Drake. I notice a lot of similarities between Astral Weeks and Brighter Later in particular. Then you get into the lyrics, ramblings about all sorts of people and feelings, from young lovers to society's outcasts. It's abstracted yet deeply confessional, like encountering a drunk stranger at a party. You're not walloped with that outright, though. Astral begins with one of its more palatable songs, the title track. Yes, I am staying true to my track-by-track breakdown because no other critic seems to be willing to do it for Astral Weeks. I've always adored this song. I was drawn to the airy, swirling feeling. It's one of the lightest songs on the album, accented by soft shakers, whimsical flute, and vibraphone. Considering how wide open the scape is, it's still cozy. If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dreams, where immobile steel rims crack and the ditch in the black road stop. As far as writing goes, Van Morrison on Astral Weeks is like a combination between John Lennon, Bob Dylan, and Nick Drake. There's Nick's adoration of nature and poetry, John's wistful anxiety and penchant for the surreal. He also had a habit of slamming nonsense words together just because he thought they sounded nice. Slipstream between the viaducts of your dreams. Yeah, that'll do it. And because of that, everything is so open to interpretation. We're still bickering over who and what Bob's songs are about. Same here. Standing with the look of avarice, talking to Huddy Ledbetter, showing pictures on the wall, whispering in the hall, pointing the finger at me is very Highway 61 and Blonde on Blonde era Dylan. Van himself says the song is all about rebirth. It's in the lyrics, the oft-repeated "to be born again." There's There's a feeling of cautious optimism. You might not be ready to turn the last page of this chapter, but you know you have to do it. Fear of letting go of the past, but excitement for what the future will bring, however uncertain it is. I get that from the lyrics and the hesitant instrumentation, plucked guitar, vibrato strings, high-plucked bass. The fervor comes in Van's delivery, throwing his voice into the rafters with those... excuse me. You can either look at them as annoying showboating or uncontrollable bursts of joy. I guess that depends if you're a pessimist or an optimist at heart. I know the record isn't autobiographical, but all this is exactly what Van and Janet would have felt as they got their new start in Boston. Right down to the supine, sighing strings through the coda. It's very romantic. We're confronted with the weight of Astral on the next track, Beside You. Some of the most haunting moments on the album are when Van repeats certain phrases. It happens for the first time here. You breathe in, you breathe out, you breathe in, you breathe out. It feels like getting stuck on one thought, the kind of kick in the chest you get when you get news you were dreading. I have no idea what the this song is about, but there are many images of childhood and innocence slipping through your fingers. Whatever the song is about, it's tragic. Is it the tragedy of the passage of time, losing touch with your younger self, getting the news that your childhood best friend has passed away? I feel any and all of the above would be appropriate interpretations. Then the release. Van spits out Beside You. It's harsh and spontaneous, somewhere between ecstasy and keening. I feel like I shouldn't be in the room for this. Songs like this showcase the quiet power of Van's band. Less experienced musicians would be totally lost. Even the music is stream of consciousness. Impressionistic, non-linear, more dots and dashes than complete phrases, but it's no less evocative. Spoiler alert, this album will be an emotional roller coaster. We go from the depths of desolation to the title track's twin sister, Sweet Thing. If Beside You was mourning youth in some way, Sweet Thing is reclaiming it, reveling in it. I will never grow so old again, and I will walk and talk in gardens all wet with rain, even reveling in youthful ignorance. Just to dig it all and not to wonder, that's just fine, and I'll be satisfied not to read in between the lines. This is the greatest string arrangement on the album, urgent descending accents followed by romantic swells that are all the highs and lows of young love. I also want to point out a technique Richard uses. He'll insert his notes in between the beats.
Sugar baby.
It creates many effects, from a child's small footsteps to a heartbeat. Here, it creates a loose shimmy within the waltz. And, with your champagne eyes and your saint-like smile, is such a Dylan line.
Your saint-like face and your ghost-like soul.
Full stop, Cypress Avenue is about a creep. The narrator is a stalker at best and pedophile at worst, and if any of you go nitpicking between the definitions of a pedophile or a whatever it is, yeah, congratulations, you've self-reported.
But AD, we don't know the narrator's age.
May I present to you, and if I'm caught one more time, Up on Cypress Avenue.
Hey, how are you? Good. Why don't you have a seat right over there?
Creepy as this song is, right? Creepy. I can see why Van wanted to explore this as a writer. Cypress Avenue is about unrequited love twisted into obsession, or maybe the overlapping of the two. It's tragic on the outside, but dark and taboo at its core. There's nothing more consuming than obsession, and nothing more gutting than when reality breaks up the delusion. The universe mocks the narrator, confining him to the position of voyeur. Frankly, it's an interesting point of view to write from. The cry of rainbow ribbons in her hair is one of the rawest and realest moments on the album. You don't rehearse in front of a mirror for something like that. I'll be honest, I don't love the harpsichord. I'm usually one for a Baroque pop moment, but here, it dates an otherwise timeless album. Richard makes quizzical, abstracted shapes among rolling harpsichord and charming fiddle. The song trots away at the end like a white pony, or maybe unravels into some delirious post-coital ecstasy as the narrator babbles about his baby. Flipping the record over, we get The Way Young Lovers Do, the most song song on the album. I'm not sure Astral Weeks would have had any viable singles, but this is the closest. It's a hint at the swinging Frank Sinatra approximation Van would adopt for Moondance. It's got an old school feel. I'd describe Young Lovers as lounge music meets 1930s big band, just with a louder approach. It's got a rock vocal with a jazz scatting solo, an appropriately boisterous arrangement for the brassiness of Young Love. Greal said this song was out of place. I disagree. It breaks up that sameness that Van complained of. And this is the first time on the record that Van's voice hasn't totally dominated the song. And that's saying a lot because it took almost a whole goddamn orchestra to do it. Horns, a trumpet solo, and a frankly bizarre showing by Richard. This is the most unintentionally funny moment on Astral. Okay, with the syncopation and the volume with which he plays and how high it is in the mix, it sounds like he accidentally glued his fingers to the neck of his instrument and he's trying to free himself. And then there's Madame George. There's some controversy over who Madame George is. Not so much her real-life identity, that kind of who is Madame George, but rather, is Madame George a man or a woman? Or was she a man at some point in her life and is now a woman? The lyric in question, in the corner, playing dominoes in drag, the one and only Madame George. Furthermore, what is her occupation? It seems like she's a lady of the night. That smell of sweet perfume comes drifting through the cool night air like Shalimar. I had to Google what that was. It's a perfume created back in 1921. Why else would the cops come around to bust her and the subject of the song have to flee in the middle of the night? I feel like there's something illegal going on here, whether it's prostitution or simply being gay in a place where being gay is illegal. Van himself claims that Madame George is a woman. He complicates things further by calling her both Madame Joy and Madame George in the song, but that could also be his famously loose diction. He really opened Pandora's box with the in drag line. Whoever Madame George is, the narrator is fascinated by and empathetic towards her. Characters like Madame George don't often get this empathetic a treatment in 1968, that is for sure. I can name 2 other songs from this era, right? Candy Says and Lola. The narrator ponders the cruelty of the world for forcing her and her lover apart. Dry your eye for Madame George. Wonder why for Madame George. We have another one of those enchanting repetition moments. A bit of a tongue twister too, I apologize. The love that loves, the love that loves, the love that loves to love the love. That's the crux of Astral Weeks, really, this obsession with love. The love of it, want for it, need for it, the desperation for it. Van gets stuck on this word, somersaulting over all its possible meanings between physical and emotional. I love how the arrangement is peeled back just to reveal bass, vibraphone, and Van for a brief intimate moment before the strings come back in to play Ms. George out. Along with rain, trees, and love, another recurring theme on Astral Weeks is observation. The stalker in Cypress Avenue, the man who spots Madame George, and now the spectator who has fallen hopelessly in love with the titular ballerina. He laments fumbling the bag when he sought her out in her dressing room. I'm standing in your doorway and I'm mumbling, and I can't remember the last thing that ran through my head. Here come the man, and he say the show must go on. Her director saying it's time for her to start the show. Our narrator has this fantasy of whisking the ballerina away from show business to lead a better life. But if it gets to you and you feel like you just can't go on, all you gotta do is ring a bell. His bell. He even beckons her to take off her shoes. I find it interesting that of the 8 songs on Astral, Ballerina was chosen to reference on the back cover. Let us go there together, darlin', way from the river to here and now, and carry it with a smile, bumper to bumper, stepping lightly, just like a ballerina. And of all songs, Van chooses this for his most impassioned delivery. He walks the tightrope of voice cracks with those freewheeling runs in Step Right Up. This is the song with that gorgeous heartbeat bass by Richard. I also have to note the creative vibraphone from Warren. He mimics a doorbell when Van sings Ring a Bell for the first time. Rounding out the album is Slim Slow Slider. It's worth noting this is not the whole Slim. A whole chunk is cut out after Every Time I See You, I Just Don't Know What to Do. Slim is the only song without strings. After everything that came before, it feels off to not have them. It's lonely, appropriate for the song's subject matter. It showcases the flute and saxophone and the best and most audible rhythm guitar on the whole album. It's the most desolate song on the record. Not even she knows why she's gone. You're gone for something, and I know you won't be back. I know you're dying, baby, and I know you know it too. Every other song had at least a hint of joy. This has none. The narrator laments his lost love and curses her brand new boy and his Cadillac. Notice how he spits out the word boy. All venom. Slim falls apart at the end, as if unable to see itself through. Van batters away at the guitar as if to take out his anguish on it. Though understated and confusing, quite open-ended, it's another instance of so much pent-up energy and feeling just having to come out somehow. In the words of Lester Bangs, quote, "What Astral Weeks deals in are not facts, but truths. Astral Weeks, insofar as it can be pinned down, is a record about people stunned by life, completely overwhelmed, stalled in their skins, their ages, and selves, paralyzed by the enormity of what in one moment of vision they can comprehend. It is a precious and terrible gift, born of a terrible truth, because what they see is both infinitely beautiful and terminally horrifying. The unlimited human ability to create or destroy according to whim. It's no Eastern mystic or psychedelic vision of the emerald beyond, nor is it some Baudelarian perception of the beauty of sleaze and grotesquerie. Maybe what it boiled down to is one moment's knowledge of the miracle of life, the capacity to be hurt, and the capacity to inflict that hurt. Astral Weeks is hard to pin down. It takes a few goes at it for it to even begin to reveal itself to you. It still hasn't 100% revealed itself to me. Maybe this unfolds over years or decades. Time will tell. Maybe I don't want it to fully reveal itself to me. It'd be like killing a butterfly, taking it apart, putting pins in its wings. Sure, it preserves the specimen, but at what cost? Isn't that the issue you run into with all art criticism? I don't think so. If anything, the murky backstory of this album, combined with its creator's constantly shifting feelings on it, make it all the more remarkable. This very easily could have been lost to the sands of time, but it wasn't. Its patrons persevered, even when the artist or label, for whatever reason, didn't. And now we're left with a self-obfuscating, impenetrable, misty, beautiful album. It's an ode to how brutal and crushing life can be and celebrates it in spite of whatever batshit circumstances befall you. Sure, we all haven't been to Belfast or fallen in love with a hooker or run out of a city by the mob, but we've all loved someone or something before. We've experienced the pain of having it and not having it. We've all ran to or out of the rain. We've all longed to be born again. For 47 minutes, Astral Weeks takes the weight off our shoulders, allowing us to escape to another time, another place, but thankfully, not escape our humanity. We're all just strangers in this world. My personal favorites off this one are the title track, Beside You, Sweet Thing, Madam George, and The Way Young Lovers Do. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That's the Vinyl Monday episode that wasn't supposed to happen. That was Astral Weeks. What do you think of this album? What do you think of Van Morrison? I'm not sure I want to know what you think of Van Morrison. But I do still love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet has to say, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11 and a new episode of my podcast every other Friday. You'll notice that once again, I'm not holding up a jacket because the record isn't out yet. It'll be out tomorrow as of me filming this. If you know literally anything about me or this channel, You already know what it is. It's gonna be one of the hardest episodes I've ever had to make because I'm not... What? It's gonna be one of the hardest episodes I've ever had to make because I'm not ready for the end of this story. I am really excited, but I'm also really sad. But it's gonna be a happy video. It's gonna be a celebration. And I am really excited for it. It's just a lot of emotions involved. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!